Hi, I'm Paul Duchesne, and welcome to Mama Paul's video podcast. Today is Friday, July 2nd, 2021. What I'm going to do today is we're going to go through today's New York Times. I pretty much I have a subscription to the paper, and I pretty much get the paper every day, and I usually skim through it one way or another. And in my mind, I rate the paper every day, and there's 10 days, and there's 1 days. You know, today was definitely something like an 8 or 9 or a 10 day. Most of the week, it's other than the mammoth stories as they were breaking, including I guess the Trump and the Bill Cosby story, which are in addition to the collapsing disaster porn happening in Florida and all the election things going on. Things are sort of building up a little bit, but today's paper, the Friday paper, really sort of said it all. And let's get the let me just get the paper up here, and we'll see if we can get the picture up. And it takes me a second to do this. My graphics department has less people in it than we were hoping for. Okay, there it is. So there's the above the fold, what we refer to as above the fold in the New York Times of the day. And what we had over there was the Trump's business charged in an audacious tax scheme on one side of the paper, on the left side. On the right side, justices bolster GOP states push for voting limits. Voting limits just got reinforced by the Supreme Court. Underneath that, we had a little article about countries backing a minimum tax. Countries, whole countries, are backing. This is happening out of Europe, and Janet Yellen is intimately involved with this. They're trying to get an international tax going on these corporations, so that the corporation can't run off to Ireland or the Bahamas or some other place and set themselves up in a tax-free zone, much like the state of Maryland is, where Joe Biden is from. The corporations are incredibly lenient laws about reporting in Maryland, which is why almost every corporation in America has a P.O. box there. The other story at the bottom of the page was Chairman Xi from China issues a warning to the world: China's rise can't be stopped. So we have the top of the page there, and the last two I gave you were from the bottom of the page. So maybe we can get rid of that one, and I'll bring in the bottom of the page for a second if I have it here. I think I do. Yeah, there it is. Okay, so there's the bottom of the page, and that's where we can see the picture of all the thousands of happy, healthy, holy Chinese women, smiles on their faces, bright red lipstick, waving the flag with a hammer and sickle. It's amazing how happy everybody is in China all the time when they're showing these amazing pictures. So anyway, we'll talk about this for a second here. Going off the front page, I'm going to work my way into a story off the front page. Is Myanmar's COVID cases are soaring as generals control the vaccines. So what happened? Things were going really well in Myanmar, formerly known as Burma, up till the generals took control of the country back in February. And when they did, things started to go downhill. So since then, the people have been literally organizing day after day after day. There's been general strikes there within the last month. So most of the generals went in to use the hospitals as a staging ground. Now the generals are in charge of the hospitals because most of the people that were in the hospital working left the hospitals. So the generals, they're good with the guns and everything. I don't know how good they are with Band-Aids and mercurochrome, but apparently they're not doing too well there. And lots of people are starting to die. They're not getting the medical treatment they need. They're not getting, the masks aren't getting out. A lot of things aren't happening about this pandemic. They've just gone downhill since the generals took over. They don't know what they're doing, and they're trying to they're trying to basically take over the entire country. They've already shut down Aung San Suu. And after she got shut down, then a lot of the civilian groups started to organize against the military and started to take action against the military. That's pretty much what's going on there while you're in the middle of a pandemic. So I've always followed Myanmar closely. The meditation practice that I do was taught by somebody, by Gwenka, who spent most of his time in Burma before it became Myanmar. Where a lot of these Buddhist forest monks were for literally 2,000 years. And it wasn't until the late 60s, early 70s that these forest monks started to come out from the forest, and Gwenka was one of the first ones. A few others have been associated with Spirit Rock and other meditation centers. But anyway, there's been a strong influence in my adult life coming out of Burma. And prior to Aung San Suu becoming a traitor to the movement, when it was actually a movie made about her about 15 years ago after she had won the Nobel Peace Prize, and she looked like the saint of Burma. Anyway, she sort of co-opted herself with the generals in order to stay a little bit in power, and then when this coup came along, boom, they just got rid of her. So she had egg on her face for this few years in between, and then they kicked her out. You can't make this stuff up, what's going on although if all you got to do is take a look at what's going on in our country here, and it's quite reflective. I'm going to get one more picture up. We'll move off that one and go back onto we'll go back to the front page story about China, and there's his picture. There's Xi Jinping's picture, and that's in the article. He gave a major speech at in China just the other day. They've been awaiting the speech for a while, and it was a very, very aggressive speech. Basically, China can't be bullied or stopped. We won't be stopped. We will become the dominant power on the planet. Now, the thing that's really irked me about what's going on in China is for 2 years, we were getting all these stories about the surveillance going on in China, the credit system that they were creating. And this credit system was basically, it started off, they didn't have a way to check people for real estate. So in other words, in America, if you went to buy a house, you went into, they had your credit score, they had all your financial information, they had all this stuff in the systems. So that you could go to buy a house, and they could look up everything and figure out whether you were eligible for the house or not. Well, they went to do something like this in China about 10, 15 years ago, and they realized they didn't have these things in place. So they started to put together a social measurement system. Well, once the Chinese started with it, it turned into way bigger than just checking on your finances. They also checked on your friends and your political beliefs and all this. So along the way, they're instituting this whole new surveillance system, and for about a year and a half, they had only 2 or 3 cities in China voluntarily let them put this surveillance system in place. And then about a year ago, the whole thing went into place throughout the rest of the country. About the same time that Hong Kong, that they started the crackdown in Hong Kong. So Hong Kong lost its British protectorate a few years ago, and when the British stepped out and the Chinese stepped in, there was a promise that they were going to maintain the democratic state that they had in Hong Kong. Well, that's not the case. They haven't maintained the democratic state at all. In fact, I don't know if I showed you this. This was just struck my mind right now. This was after the fall, and where Ben Rhodes' name is, that picture there below him, those are all these people with umbrellas that are out in the streets of China protesting. So we've had thousands and thousands of people protesting throughout parts of China, Hong Kong very specifically, but as of about a week ago, they shut down the last newspaper. They arrested the last newspaper men. They stopped one of the writers at the airport. So the crackdown seems to be pretty thorough. So China's warning to the rest of the world that they can't be bullied. They seem to be acting on their promises internally at the very least, and externally, how far are they going to go? They already have conquered us economically, it appears. I can't pick up anything that isn't made in China. So anyway, that was quite a story there today with Xi Jinping looking for ultimate control. All these autocrats, they always want more power, which is exemplified by our own little autocrat, Donald the Trump. Okay, let's move on to the other headline story on the front page there. So we'll get rid of, no, we don't have it up anymore. Okay, so let's put up the other story, and that'll be Weisselberg. Let me get rid of that and bring up Weisselberg. And where is he? Come on here, Alan. There you are. I really like this picture of him. Yesterday's paper, okay, there he is. And you usually don't see too many pictures of Weisselberg. And his name, by the way, is Weissel, W-I-S-S-E-L. It's not Weisenberg, it's Weisselberg. Weisselberg. And there he is looking like a typical gangster lawyer. And some of the faces he's made in the last 2 days are just absolutely remarkable. And the interesting thing here is, of all of the things that they could have gone after them for, the involvement with Russia, well, they went over this whole list of the bigger issues, and they didn't go after all these bigger issues that they went. They went after the smaller issues, and this is sort of what happens a lot of the times. What's what happened with Al Capone? They never got him for murdering people or anything like that. They got him on tax evasion, and that's exactly what's going on here, tax evasion. So Weisselberg has been living in this Upper West Side apartment, and a lot of these monies that are paying his daily bills are going through the Trump organization as they're paying these bills. They're keeping them off the books. So he's not declaring them as income, which they are, income in kind. He's not declaring them as income. They're not declaring that they're paying them out. So they got a whole separate side books over here. And they're paying for, you know, his phone bills and his electrical bills and his internet bills. They're paying for some of his kids going to school. They're paying for cars, all sorts of stuff. So the guy gets a basic salary, which is a little bit less than $1 million, and I don't know how much he's got that's approaching that, but he's probably got at least as much in the benefits coming in. It's not just Weisselberg. It's throughout the upper echelons of the company. And as you're reading the story about this, one of the things that really pops out at you is we know how Trump is notorious for not paying people. Well, Weisselberg is the force behind the pen that's signing the checks. And Weisselberg totally doesn't like to pay people for what they do. And one of the reasons this is hangs in my jaw so much is I have, or had, he's not with us anymore, but I had a relative in New York who was personally screwed by Donald Trump in terms of, he was an elevator mechanic, and he was in a building. And there's one night, and Trump wanted to make sure that he had his limousine available. Now, so the limousine goes up and down in this huge elevator that they've got. It went up to the tower. Well, not only did they kept the elevator mechanic there, a couple elevator people, in addition to the drivers, all sorts of people were kept waiting for Donald, who might want to use this in the next so many hours. Well, they kept them there half the night. They never used it, and nobody ever got paid a dime for waiting on this SOB. This guy's history goes back a long way. And he didn't just happen to trip into some tax scheme that, oh, wow, where'd this come from? Dad, Fred, was very, very, very friendly with the Gambino family, who taught him how to massage the books. It was Donald's father, Fred, who was originally involved with the mob in Queens. It was the same mob that robbed Kennedy Airport back in the 70s. That same mob, those are the people that Donald's father was heavily involved with, who taught him how to screw the residents in these apartment buildings where they were by falsely charging, say, a $500 refrigerator. They might have billed $5,000. They might have paid $100 for it. So they use creative bookkeeping at both ends. One end to at one end to look like they're charging the most amount of money so that they can increase the rent the most, and at the other end for the IRS saying that they're paying the least amount of money in. So they're giving it to you at both ends. Watching this guy was interesting. One of the pictures of Weisselberg the other day showed him walking on his little perk walk. He was coming out of the building, and his hands were in back of him. Somebody took a picture in back of him, and it looked like the handcuffs were hanging off of his hand. They weren't hanging off. He had two sets of handcuffs on. Apparently, they have a polite set of handcuffs that they use for wealthy guests, and that was holding the hands in the back, and he was holding the second set in his fingers. So anyway, he went out. He was indicted. They took his passport away, and I would put a security guard on this guy 24/7. He has easy access to get the heck out of this country here. Not too many. Well, maybe some of you may remember. Remember Ken Lay and the Enron scandal? Whatever happened to Ken Lay? Got on a plane one day, and boom, that was the end of it. We never saw another day of Ken Lay. I wonder if a similar thing might happen with Alan Weisselberg. Weisselberg is what it is. Turning the paper over to page A15. I'm not going to put it up here. There's an article here, and the headline is "Mandated Housing is Eyed for Sacramento's Homeless." So what's going on in Sacramento is a municipal mandate to deal with a humanitarian crisis that has spread in California as the state's median home value has soared and rents have exploded. It could help the city comply with a federal court. They have made it harder to enforce laws against homeless encampments in Los Angeles and Idaho. And what they want is they want the municipalities to provide alternatives to sleeping outdoors. So that's what's happening in Sacramento. They're looking at how they're going to solve the homelessness problem. Now, you can barely pick up a newspaper, I'll bet, anywhere in this country without finding an article about the homeless people somewhere in your state or your neighborhood or your town even. Particularly here in Marin County, in Richie Richville here, there were a few homeless people in Sausalito. Well, as the income inequality increases, as the dot-com people moved into San Francisco, and as a city which could handle a good mix of people suddenly became unable to handle anybody that wasn't making, $100,000+ a year. The city got more and more and more wealth disparity, and as that happens, you wind up with more and more people on the street. So the more the wealth disparity increases, the more poor people you have, the more poor people that can't afford to keep up with the housing and the food and everything, and the more people you wind up on the street. This isn't rocket science. I mean, I grew up in New York City, and I was really aware of the disparity between the people who were on, say, the Upper East Side. 96th Street was always my example. You went up to the museums around 86th Street, the Museum of Modern Art, no, not Modern Art, no, the Museum of Natural History, no, the Metropolitan Museum was up in the 80s. And 96th Street is sort of one of the last really wealthy kind of blocks on Fifth Avenue. It sort of deteriorates a little till you get to 110th, but from that area on the side of Central Park, Fifth Avenue, 96th, about 10 blocks away, you would be in the middle of the lower East Harlem, sort of mix of East Harlem and Spanish Harlem kind of ghetto. And it's where the people who were the nannies and the cooks and the chauffeurs, that's where they all lived. And they could come down not too far away to where all the wealthy people were. So you found this sort of, I noticed this when I was very young in New York, you had this sort of buffer zone right around where the neighborhood was. And then shortly after that buffer zone, there would be a sharp decline in your standard of living. Let's put it that way. Well, the wealthier you get, the more wealthy people you get, the pie is only so big. And if the top 1% is going to take more and more and more and more, then the bottom 90% or 99% are going to have less and less and less. And the way it works is the people with the least amount of economic impact get screwed the most. So you got homelessness is just increasing rampantly all around this whole country. For a couple of years, I worked with a young man from Germany, and we got really, really close together. And he came into my life when I was working on my organic Twinkie project. And he had been all around the world quite a bit, and he was from Germany. And at one point, I said, well, we'll go into the food show at the Moscow. And he sent us. We drive into the city, and we're driving past the lower Tenderloin area. And there's people living on cardboard. This is a few years ago. There's people living on cardboard boxes in the street around the corner from a church. He was stupefied, had never seen anything like this. Could not imagine that there were people living on the streets in America, in San Francisco. Well, that was 4 or 5 years ago. Now, the homeless population has doubled or tripled. The homeless population in this county has doubled or tripled. There are people living under the freeways. Just recently, they shoveled a whole bunch of people out of a homeless encampment up north. They moved them off the homeless encampment in Sausalito. They're shoveling them around, trying to figure out what to do. Nobody sits down and looks at the root cause of the problem. The root cause of the problem is the predatory capitalism that we're living in the midst of today. I just wanted to mention that. That's hardly a mention. I feel like every day when I pick up the paper and I look at these articles, I'm just flabbergasted at the amount of it that's around and how insidious it is, and people just see it right after another. And it's always somebody else's fault. Somebody always, oh, they're not taking care of themselves. Oh, they didn't pull themselves up by their own bootstraps. Well, I'll tell you, if you don't have a pair of boots on, it's really difficult to pull yourself up by your bootstraps. Moving along, page A18, there's an interesting little thing here. Office vacancies hit a record high, hindering New York City's recovery. New York City's recovery and the state of life in New York City is something I'm going to talk about quite a bit, actually. And, okay, this is a recent book I've got. I've been looking at this book for years in the New York Review of Books. And the title is The Fall of the Great American City by Kevin Baker. And it's a really interesting book, and he goes through all these different neighborhoods. He's talking about what's happened over the last 10, 20, 30, 40 years. The big thing going on is, well, this is interesting here because the vacancy rates are high, and they tell you how many people are empty in the 21% of the offices are vacant in downtown Manhattan. Well, that's a figure that sort of blows you out a little bit, 21% vacancy rate in the offices. Well, we're just coming out of the pandemic. There is a 30% vacancy rate in residential buildings from 45th up to 70th Street on the east side of Manhattan, specifically between, I think, 5th and Park Avenues. 30% vacancy rate. Richard Wolff, who has his economic update show on KPFA every week, he walked around the east side of Manhattan about 3 or 4 years ago and talked about it. And what you've got is all the small shops that were in these neighborhoods, the dry cleaner, the little deli, the small florist shop, they're gone. And what's going on is and they've been building buildings right and left, putting more up every day. A tremendous amount of these are being built and used to launder money, either to buy it at a low end and resell it at a high end, or the opposite, or just to stash money there. But the point is, most of these, a third are vacant. Another significant number are partially used. So you wind up with the Richie Riches sort of peppered throughout these buildings, and when they are around, they get in their little cars and they go down to Broadway to go to a show or a five-star restaurant. But they don't need to go into the neighborhood. No. They want to go to, down to Sardi's or something like that. So this is a thing that's going on there in New York, and I'm going to talk about this a little bit more. It's when I left New York in 75. New York was literally in a state of dying. I even have an album called about A City is Dying. There was a resurgence and a rebirth in the late 70s, early 80s, and New York sort of came back. After the 80s into the 90s, as you start to get into the 90s is when the big boom in buildings started. There's not a square inch of Manhattan that they leave unbuilt upon nowadays. And for my little trip a couple of weeks ago to the west side, it was mind-boggling the amount of buildings. And if you're looking down at it, it's just spectacular looking with the lights and the tall buildings and all the razzle-dazzle. But when you're on the street walking around, it's a completely different story. And that's when you're tripping over the homeless guy here and the beggar over there. And, oh, you better watch out for that guy. Anyway, it gets a little weird. We're going to talk about this a little bit more, but there it is. It's another one of those in the paper, pretty regularly articles, and a city is dying. The last one I'm going to talk about here is the Krugman op-ed, the Krugman editorial here, and I'll get up a little pic of it so you can see a little bit what it looks like. Only, yeah, right. This is classic, and the title is "Only the Incompetent Need Apply." Only the incompetent need apply. Now, before I saw this, I had been talking to some people, and a lot of times I've referred to, or people I know referred to, the alt-right people as stupid, things like this. Well, or basket deplorables, whatever. They're not stupid. A lot of these people aren't stupid. A lot of them are smart. But what they are is ignorant. They're ignoring the facts. They're ignorant. They're ignoring the facts. The facts that get put in front of them are not even facts. Fox News notoriously puts out false information all day long. And the fact that they're allowed to do that is a real problem with our system. If this was 1960 anything, they wouldn't be on the air. They wouldn't be allowed to be called a news network. They literally put out stuff right and left that they make up, that comes from, you know, a One American Network or something. These ridiculous, they literally make stuff up right and left. Krugman's article, "Only the Incompetent Need Apply." And what he's only the political right expertise is disqualifying. He's talking about how over the last few years, with Trump in the White House and with Trump gaining more power by the day, the lies wind up perpetuating, and the Republicans don't want to hear the truth on any level. And if somebody is an expert in something, or a medical expert like Fauci, oh, he's no good, get rid of these experts. We got to bring in some crackpot. And he specifically quotes as one crackpot that was chasing after him quite a few times, a guy named Stephen Moore. He was an economic advisor to Trump, who at one point came in and said, you know, don't worry about this virus. We should be opening up the whole economy in a couple of weeks by Easter time. Whew. We'd probably have twice as many dead if they listened to this guy at that time. But this guy Moore has been wrong about everything he has predicted year after year after year, including after going after Krugman a number of times. And he's always wrong. He's always wrong. And he's about as accurate as Larry Kudlow, the financial screamer that's on Fox News on a regular basis. So that's what this whole article is about. It's about how the modern GOP doesn't want to hear from serious economists, whatever their politics are. They prefer the charlatans and the cranks. At the end of this, how did we end up here? How did one of the two major political parties come not only to reject democracy, but to explicitly exalt ignorance and despise competence of any kind? I don't know. But if you aren't terrified, you aren't paying attention. I think there's the key. And that's the last line on Krugman here is, if you aren't terrified, you're not paying attention. All right, I'm going to pull down Krugman here. I'm going to show you one more little thing, which is going to be on the positive side. If we still have it here. I hope I have it here. I don't have it here. Well, I guess I'll just pull it up right here. Okay. It's not there. I thought I took it. let's go over here to this camera. It's a magazine called Breathe, and it's on the order of the mindfulness magazines that are out there, quite a few of them. But there was one, come back to me, there was one glaring page article here, which I really, and they have a picture of a, I'll put the picture up here, sometimes I get them right, sometimes I don't. You don't find too many black people in general in any of these yoga magazines or meditation magazines up till about a year or two ago. And about 2 years ago, there started to be a little bit of a change, and we started to see more and more of an influence in the other communities of color. And in this case, we have this this man here sitting in a perfect lotus posture. And the quote here is from Aldous Huxley. "There's only one corner of the universe you can be certain of improving, and that's your own self." There's only one center, only one corner of the universe that you can be certain of improving, and that's your own self. Okay, peace, patience, persistence, and we'll see you as soon as we can. I'll try to get a show in for the July 4th. Hopefully I will.